The three objectives of Middle Nation, as I've talked about before, economic sovereignty, political independence, and psychological decolonization, these are all interconnected. They're all forms of decolonization. All of those are forms of decolonization. And to a great extent, they're interdependent forms of decolonization, just as colonization itself manifests in all three of those spheres. I mean, colonization means economic subjugation and subordination, lack of political independence, and a subjugated psyche. So determining which of these three objectives should be taken as a priority is kind of a chicken and the egg type of a question, because you can't have political independence without economic sovereignty, and to a great extent, vice versa. And of course, you can't properly pursue either of those objectives if you're still operating with a colonized mind, a colonized mindset. So, for instance, you could say that it represents economic sovereignty, which is basically economic decolonization. You could say that it's a form of economic sovereignty if you choose to go to a local fast food restaurant instead of to a McDonald's. That's a form of economic decolonization because you're contributing to local businesses. You're helping, you're keeping the money within your own economy. You're uh, keeping the money domestically instead of putting it into the foreign pockets of multinationals. And in doing this, you're contributing to building the clout and the leverage and the power of local business people, which to one extent or another will amplify their voices vis-a-vis your government against the voices of foreign investors and foreign companies. So domestic elites will have more influence and more leverage because of you, which decreases the relative influence of foreigners over your government. The boosting of the local economy also will make the government less vulnerable and less needy for foreign investment. And it decreases their reliance on outsiders for financial support and so on. And that contributes to the political independence of your government, which they can't have as long as they're economically dependent. And of course, we can assume that some degree of psychological decolonization has already occurred with you, whereby you have made the choice to support a local fast food restaurant instead of going to, say, McDonald's. So the Western brand, for whatever reason, doesn't appeal to you. The local one does. And maybe this is even a manifestation of your preference for the customary food of your own people and a sort of a rejection of the dietary norms of the West, the tastes and the lifestyle and the standards of the colonizing nations. And all of this represents some degree of psychological decolonization, but it's just one layer of it. It's sort of a surface layer. Because, for instance, why are you eating fast food in the first place? And why is the fast food restaurant that you're going to a franchise? I mean, fast food outlets were a byproduct of a whole way of life, a very Western way of life. And so are franchises. I mean, think about it. Fast food restaurants sprang up in response to a very peculiar culture, a culture dominated by capitalistic imperatives, imperatives that meant that people did not have the time to have proper meals, to cook proper meals, not to mention to afford proper meals. It's the 9 to 5 work culture where you have an hour or half an hour for lunch with roughly 90% of your time, your waking hours, being occupied by either going to or coming from or being at the job. Food intake is an afterthought. It's just fuel for the machine that the culture has turned you into. And the same culture is why fast food is made the way it's made. Prefabricated, assembly line, who knows what it's made of, meals. Just slop in the trough to give you enough energy to do your job today. Never mind how unhealthy it is, never mind that it erodes your body. In that culture, everything is disposable, including you. They tell you that it's for your convenience, but the whole phenomenon developed out of the exploitative, materialistic, profit-obsessed mentality of the West, in which your time, which is what your life is made of, your time belongs to your employer. And the whole purpose of your time is productivity for your employer. It's not about your convenience, it's about your boss's convenience. People started eating at fast food restaurants because the owners of their time, their employers, only allow them a brief pause in the day in which they're allowed to not be productive for the company or for the employer. I mean, these fast food outlets aren't just selling you burgers and fries, they're selling you a whole narrative of convenience and speed and efficiency, just to obscure the fact that the whole culture is quietly tightening the chains around your choices. It's like someone choking you and giving you CPR at the same time, which is the basic business model of how the West does capitalism. Create the problem and then sell you a way to help you cope with the problem, not a solution to the problem. They don't sell solutions, they sell coping mechanisms. Everyone knows that a steady diet of fast food will result in malnutrition, but the culture was malnourished from before. It's a malnourished mentality. You know, those golden arches are symbols of a system that commodifies your time, dictates your choices, and takes your health and your welfare and your freedom as a joke. No wonder the mascot is a clown. And yes, they don't want you sitting down for a proper meal with your family, a home cooked meal with your family. Families represent competitors to your loyalty, for your loyalty. The only thing that your family is supposed to be for you is just mouths to feed so that you'll keep working, not people that you need, not a support network. You're supposed to be loyal to the job, to the company. Your co-workers are your family now, right? Don't you see how business co-ops the language of families? We're all one big happy family at this company. I mean, what kind of a tyrannical, insane family would that be? Only Joseph Fritzl's family was worse, maybe. No, they want you atomized. They want you isolated, obligated, and subjugated, wolfing down fake hamburgers and fake French fries and a huge, sugary, fizzy drink just to ramp up your productivity and your energy for the second half of the day. And maybe you can pick up some more on the way home at the drive-through on your commute back to your cell before it all starts again tomorrow. And why are they everywhere, by the way? Why are these always franchises? I mean, part of that is for the same reason, because fast food is a cultural phenomenon across the whole society. So they have to install these feeding stations across the city and across the country because everyone is in the same form of slavery. But part of it is also because, again, because of the capitalistic imperatives that dominate the entire Western world. Franchising is a clever tool of monopolistic capitalism, a way for a handful of entities to tighten their grip on entire sectors. They dictate prices, control marketing strategies, limit the autonomy of the individual striving for success. It's a rigged game where the dice are always loaded in favor of those who control the brands. They extract the profits from hardworking franchisees, imposing royalty fees, advertising fees, mandatory supply purchases, and so on. It's a system where the wealth all flows upward. You know, they're told that they're in business for themselves, but in truth, they're in business for the franchisers. This isn't about fostering entrepreneurship. It's about building empires, market dominance, financial exploitation, and erasing opportunities for genuinely independent small businesses. So instead of having a dozen family-owned restaurants or shops, you have a dozen franchises for the same company, shutting out everyone else. And of course, this leads to huge economic imbalances with fewer and fewer people and fewer companies owning and controlling more and more of the wealth. And obviously, this also actually stifles innovation and creativity. And of course, stifles competition in the market, which are all things that capitalism is supposed to encourage. It's this cancer-like mentality, which is a colonizer mentality. Spread, dominate, devour. It's not enough for you to have a successful business that secures your family's provision and their prosperity. You should always want to have more. You know, you should always want to be bigger, expand, defeat the competition, increase market share, and so on. It's driven by both greed and discontent, dissatisfaction with what you have, and the materialistic definition of what gives life value and meaning. So, yes, psychological and cultural decolonization is deeply layered. And so much of what is called modernity is actually dystopian byproducts of colonization, the mentality of colonization, parasitic imperialistic capitalism, the dehumanization of workers, the invalidation of rights over resources, the engineering of the entire society around the supremacy of the profit motive. You know, one dimension of the Sunnah was the material lifestyle of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sunnah of satisfaction and contentment, of being grateful and satisfied with the materially sufficient. That's not to say that Islam disapproves of earning wealth. Many of the Sahaba were rich men, but did they live the lifestyles of rich men? Were they extravagant? Were they ostentatious? Or was their wealth used in the service of Islam? No. They thought of themselves as slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And they lived like slaves. They sat on the ground. They ate on the floor. They shared their food. And most of them only traded or did business just enough to meet their needs. And if they worked more, it was only to earn money to give in sadaqah. You know, people these days like to justify greed by saying that it is the best driver for achievement, as if no one was ever driven by a sense of purpose or personal fulfillment. I mean, whoever in history accomplished more in a shorter period of time than the first generations of Islam? They weren't driven by greed. They weren't driven or motivated by wealth or the desire for wealth. They were disappointed when they defeated an enemy, and that enemy opted to pay jizya rather than accepting Islam. Jizya meant wealth for the Muslims, but they didn't prefer that option. If they just wanted money, then they didn't even have to invite the enemies to Islam. They could have just defeated them and not even given them that option. They could have just taken over and demanded jizya without giving them another way that would do nothing but deprive the Muslims of wealth, deprive the Muslims of jizya, deprive them of money. But that's what they preferred. They would have much rather, when they conquered an enemy, that enemy would convert to Islam rather than paying them money. But you see, the West developed from and developed through kufr. And kufr is, of course, informed by shaitan and the view held by Iblis about human beings, which is that we are empty, material, basically objects with no inherent value. So the systems and the societies that developed in the West all reflect this way of thinking. The people's fitrah has been garbled by this confusion and this degraded view of humanity. So they place value on material things, on external things, on money, and so on, because essentially they feel empty and worthless. The West mutilated their fitrah, and they're trying to mutilate ours. And one of the ways that they try to mutilate our fitrah is by telling us that it isn't mutilation, it's modernity. So a major element of psychological decolonization is for us to recognize the kufr that permeates every level of those societies and how it has deformed them unnaturally and destructively. Because their development was guided by waswasa, and our development was guided by wahi. So we have to deconstruct whatever they developed down to the root, dig all the way down, because you might think that the West is a mountain, but it's a landfill. You think it's a mountain. You think it looks like a mountain, but that's just because it's got so much toxic waste buried underneath. And we don't want that for our societies. We don't want your contamination and your pollution, no matter how pretty the packaging might be.